Today I'm going to do a book talk on four of my recent favorite nonfiction books for young adults. The first book I'm going to talk about is Freedom Walkers, The Story of the Montgomery Bus Boycott by Russell Friedman. This book takes readers through the events that surrounded the Montgomery Bus Boycott in 1955 in Montgomery, Alabama. In this book, you'll find famous civil rights advocates such as Martin Luther King Jr. and Rosa Parks, but you'll also find lesser known advocates that were just as important but not as widely covered in the news. This book will show readers what happened during the boycott, also what happened before and after, and why it was so necessary to have the boycott at this time. Here, I'll read a passage that provides some background for the readers of what was going on in Alabama at the time. Not so long ago in Montgomery, Alabama, the color of your skin determined where you could sit on a public bus. If you happened to be an African American, you had to sit in the back of the bus, even if there were empty seats up front. Back then, racial segregation was the rule throughout the American South. Strict laws, called Jim Crow laws, enforced a system of white supremacy that discriminated against blacks and kept them in their place as second-class citizens. People were separated by race from the moment they were born in segregated hospitals until the day they were buried in segregated cemeteries. Blacks and whites did not attend the same schools, worship in the same churches, eat in the same restaurants, sleep in the same hotels, drink from the same water fountains, or sit together in the same movie theaters. This book gives just the right amount of detail, and it's a great overview of the nonviolent means that this group of people had to take to gain basic civil rights in the law. My second book is The Fairy Ring, or Elsie and Francis Fool the World, by Mary Lozier. And as a fantasy fan, I was really excited to read a nonfiction book that had fairies in the title. The whole incident happens because Francis and Elsie's parents don't take them seriously and think they're just silly girls, which I'm sure many teens and young readers have felt that way at one point or another. A fun fact about this book is that Sir Arthur Conan Doyle makes an appearance. He's the author of Sherlock Holmes, and he is portrayed as a true believer in the fairies. Here's a passage from this book about when the girls first were taking photos with their fairies. Elsie had stuck the hat pins, each with its dancing fairy, on a mossy bank among the tangle of ferns and wildflowers. The watercolor fairies danced barefoot, on tiptoe, their filmy dresses and long hair flying. Elsie had painted their wings with spots like butterflies' wings. One fairy played a set of long pipes. They were graceful, cheery-looking little creatures with beautiful, slender ankles. Frances told Elsie how pretty they were. Then she got down behind them. Frances was wearing an everyday dress with the sleeves rolled up, but the wreath of pansies in her hair looked nice. She rested her chin on her hand and gazed at the camera. Elsie held the black box. Frances watched, and Elsie pressed the lever. While this book does leave some questions about the events unanswered, the book covers the main points of the scandal and how it got to be blown out of proportion a little bit. And it's a really interesting book, especially for fantasy fans. All right, my third book is Chasing Lincoln's Killer by James Swanson. Everyone who has gone to elementary school knows how Abraham Lincoln was killed. The famous actor John Wilkes Booth shot him from behind in the head and while he was watching a play at the local theater. The book goes into the actual murder, but it's from the point of view of the assassin, which makes this book fairly unique among other books about Abraham Lincoln. The book is all about how Booth decided to do what he did and why he felt justified in that. I gained a lot of information from this book. I don't know if my memory is fading, but I couldn't even remember what happened to John Wilkes Booth after he killed Lincoln. So this was a really good book and provided a lot of information, but in a fun way. It's so well written that even though I knew what would happen, I still got caught up in the story. It reads more like a mystery novel than a nonfiction book, and I definitely had that feeling of anticipation while reading it. Um, this book not only goes into the assassination of Lincoln, but also provides information about what was going on near the end of the Civil War and how both sides were feeling, and it lets readers know more why the South didn't understand why Lincoln would do what he did. And here's the events right after Booth shot Lincoln, with Booth leaping out of the president's box and onto the stage below. Okay. Booth scrambled to center stage, turned to the audience, and stood up straight. Though every second was precious to his escape, he knew that this was his last appearance on the American stage. This would be the performance he would be remembered for. All eyes were on him. He stood still, paused to build suspense, and thrust his bloody dagger victoriously into the air. The gas lights shone on the shiny blade now stained with blood. Sic semper tyrannis, he thundered. It was the state motto of Virginia. Thus always to tyrants. Then Booth shouted, "The South is avenged." So this book is really interesting for a lot of reasons, but it's written so that it will really get your attention and keep you wanting to know what happens, even though you probably already do. My fourth and final book is Bootleg, Murder, Moonshine, and the Lawless Years of Prohibition by Karen Blumenthal. This book shines a light on the short and mysterious part of the United States history. There are pictures on practically every page. Ooh. Move the camera. And so that makes it a fairly easy read while still providing all the information that you need to know. To get an idea of why Prohibition was thought to be such a good idea, here's a passage about what a saloon was like in the 1800s. By the 1800s, a glut of beer prompted brewers to open up thousands of storefront saloons, which became something like community gathering places. The saloons often offered a free lunch to drinkers, typically cold cuts and salty foods like smoked fish, pretzels, and pork, and beans to make the drinker thirstier. Men stopped by after work to have a drink while catching up on the day's events, seeing friends, and when the time came, voting. Some of the saloons were elegant and upper crust, but most were rowdy, raucous, and dirty, with sawdust on the floor to hide spills and tobacco juice. So while the saloons, for some, like the men, felt like they were a good idea, most of the time they ended up being places that were dirty and people would not want to visit. Women and children would not be welcome there. This book includes the life and history of some very famous people, such as the gangster Al Capone, and it also includes a little of the history of one of America's biggest sports, NASCAR. The book goes over the years of Prohibition as well as before and after, so you can see why it was thought to be such a good idea to ban alcohol, and then by the end of Prohibition, why it was necessary to appeal that law. So those are my 4 books, and thanks for listening.